Hey, Slick Talkers, thank you so much for tuning into this podcast. And I know that if you love this show, you'll also love my morning show called Good Morning Hospitality with my co hosts Michael Golden and Brandy Canali, as we spend 30 minutes every Monday morning to dive into the industry's top latest news and trending topics. So go check it out on wherever you find your podcasts at Good Morning Hospitality. And you can live stream with us on Monday mornings on LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, and of course, YouTube. Now, I hope you enjoy this episode.
Is there a world in which travelers like me, who like to stay in nice places, who do have flexibility because they can go anywhere with work, is there a way they follow some of the most incredible homes around the country, around the world, and then get notified when they become available? And is there a way where you could create a system where those emails that get sent offer some sort of meaningful discount? Where if we're 2 weeks out, place is available, and I book today, I could score up to 30% off of that stay or whatever it might be, right? Is there a system where that works?
You're listening to Slick Talk, the hospitality podcast, a podcast for those who are in and around the hospitality industry who love, live, and breathe what they do. You can join us for candid and unscripted conversations with hospitality experts and founders as we go deeper into their personal stories while they're sharing their triumphs and trials that got them to where they are today. I'm your host, Will Slickers, and you're listening to an episode of Slick Talk, the hospitality podcast. Now, let's begin. All right, Nathan, welcome back to A Minute with Minute on Slick Talk. And we're going to jump into the question today of what is the biggest misunderstanding when it comes to what Minute does and doesn't do?
Great question, Will. I think the biggest misunderstanding is probably that we do more than just noise. I know we'll cover that in another minute with minute. So for now, I'm going to major specifically on the noise feature itself. Many people think that we can let you know when there's noise in your unit, and that's the end. But what we can actually do with our pro account is import the data for your guests when they're staying, what's their phone number, etc., and then allow you to automate communication with that guest when there's a noise event. So what we hear from many of our users is after sending even one text message to the guest letting them know that there's noise, they tend to quiet down because they don't realize that they're being noisy. So in many cases, if you use our automation, you may actually resolve the problem with no input from yourself. Just an automated message from the system asking them to quiet down, and then the noise issue is over.
I love it. You heard it here first, folks. A Minute with Minute, and now back to the episode. All right, Slick Talkers, welcome back to another episode. And today I get to interview another fellow podcaster, one who has a way better podcast voice than I do, two who has just become a rising star in our industry from his podcast Behind the Stays. So I'm really excited to welcome Zach Booza-Cruz to the show. And Zach, my friend, it's so great to have you on, and someone that actually has really good audio and video. So it's going to be a great episode.
Dude, it's honestly a pleasure, man. And it's been so fun getting to learn from you. And we've only been connected, not even it's been like 6 months, but it's been fun to be connected, learn from you, learn from what you're building at Hospitality FM. It's just so impressive. So I'm just honored to be here and excited for our chat today.
Dude, speaking of impressed, we were talking about this before hitting record, and it's just the way you've made this wave in the industry, not being an operator yourself. But I want to hear a story like, where does everything begin for Zach professionally, and then also getting into this world of short term rentals and hospitality?
Yeah, great question. So it begins relatively recently during COVID. My wife and I, we were living in Washington D.C. I'm a growth marketer by trade, so I was leading growth at an agency and doing some podcasting there. Actually, I started a podcast for that agency. It's where I first fell in love with this like medium, right? Where you I think it's just because I like talking a lot, and so when you like to talk a lot and you like talking to interesting people, podcasting I feel is where you end up.
Yeah.
So I was working at a growth agency, and my wife, she's actually an attorney, so we were both working like pretty intense jobs. And during COVID, we're on Zoom calls all the time, right? We were in a 700 square foot apartment in DC, and it just wasn't working out. It wasn't, and we were like very newly married too. So I was like, geez, man, this is not a good indicator. We're just stressed all the time, on top of each other. We need some more space. So we argue about whose idea it was to this day. But one of us said to the other at some point, what if we broke our lease and just went Airbnb hopping. And the other at the time, thought that was a crazy idea. And then we'd flip and flop between one of us being like, no, we should do it. And the other being like, hell no, that's a terrible decision. We don't know what's happening. But long story short, we ended up getting on the road. We broke our lease and we spent the next 15 months traveling full time, not staying
Mm.
more than a week in a short term rental. And I do just want to off the cuff say this was before I knew anything about the industry. So when I say like
Yeah.
we lived on Airbnb, like we exclusively used the app to like and stay. I knew nothing about direct bookings. I knew nothing about this grander world of short term rentals and vacation rentals, and had no idea that the word Airbnb could be so triggering to folks. Now I've learned like a lesson or two, but at the time, it's all I knew, right? And so we literally used the map view on Airbnb. We'd plan our travel about a week in advance, and we spent the next 15 months living again full time on
Mm.
Airbnb. And along the way, I started meeting incredible hosts, and that was really the entry point into my interest in the industry, was just meeting these remarkable people who were retired flight attendants or people who were entrepreneurs who had just sold off a company and they had bought a portfolio of 10 really cool unique stays, right? Or the mom and pop that this was their vacation rental, their family's vacation rental that they've had for years, and they just did a renovation to it and they were so proud of it. And really it was these people who were serving up just these wonderful experiences. And again, this was in the heat of COVID too, where a lot of folks had tons of cancellations. And I think hosts were going the extra mile, right? For the
Yeah.
guests that were
Yeah.
able to still make it out. And that was where I first realized, whoa, there's something special about this space. And I want to learn a little bit more about it. So that was my first forte into even realizing that I knew what hospitality was, but I had always just associated with it with hotels, right? And so this idea of
Yeah.
like hospitality being a business, right, in the vacation rental and short-term rental space was foreign, but then meeting these hosts really helped me realize that there's a special place here and I want to learn more about it. So I just got curious.
So I'm seeing a pattern with you. Curiosity seems to be a big driver for a lot of things in your life, going also into growth marketing. I would love to know, just from an early age, what was Zach like running around through elementary and middle school and high school? Were you always that curious, always wanted to discover, or was there a certain spark or a moment in your life where that kind of switch turned on?
Yeah, I was asking my mom about this recently, and so she claims, and I feel like you can't really trust moms because they're totally
Yeah.
biased. So she claims that at 10 years old, I like approached her and I said, "Hey, mom, I want to change the world." And I have no recollection of saying this, but
Yeah.
that's apparently what I said. And then I think she said something along the lines of like, "All right, you got to be a really good person. You got to work like really hard if you want to do that." And so I think the idea of like hard work was always ingrained in me. And yeah, I think actually, to be candid, I was always interested in media. Like
Mm.
I thought I wanted to go to USC and do film school there. That was like the goal for, I'd say, probably like later elementary school and into middle school. And I think what it really was is I was always moved by like people's stories, right? This idea that everyone has got a story, everyone's story is so unique, and by sharing people's stories, it really helps change your perspective, right? Or at least offers a new perspective. And I think that idea was just always attractive to me. And if I could use story as like a way to influence people
Mm.
to broaden their horizons, that would be a big win. And so I think I was always curious about people, I guess is a better way. Was I always curious about like the world? I don't know, but I was definitely always curious about what makes Will tick. Why is Will the way that Will is? And I want to understand why Will is the way that, Will is.
I think that's where you and I very much are similar. That's the same thing with me on the podcast. It's just more people driven. I love the stories. And I want to know, was Zach always curious when he was in elementary school, or did he like have a moment where it just flipped on? And so for you, it's really cool to hear. And I'm curious because you've done over what 100 interviews and episodes with your show already in such a short period of time. I love that you said perspective is something that I think we could all try to gain more of.
Yeah.
And I'm curious to hear your lessons learned along the way of 100 plus conversations with different perspectives and different stories as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd say right off the bat, I learned that some people get offended when you call their places Airbnbs, right? And they're short-term rental operators who have worked really hard to build these really incredible brands, and it's almost just like a kick in the stomach when you
Hmm.
talk about their places as an Airbnb. So I learned, I guess, lingo, right, is more important to some people than others. That said, and I don't know that this is a particularly like hot take, but What I like to tell people, which I do think is worth like remembering, specifically
Yeah.
on the Airbnb note, is to your average consumer, to people outside of the industry, they know Airbnb and they don't know short-term rental. It's a long ass term first and foremost. Like
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
hard to, it's so cumbersome. And even vacation rentals, like people don't even say that. And I don't
Mhm.
know that they ever said that. They might say like a beach home, or hey,
Yeah.
we're going to go vacation and stay in like this home in the mountains, right? But even like the
Mhm.
term vacation rental, right? It's not common with respect to consumers. And actually, right before we hopped on, Will, I was doing some quick like little. I'm an SEO like nerd, so I was doing some digging around like how like what are the terms that people actually search for around like the vacation rental industry. And if you just Google like vacation rental deals, right, the average monthly search volume that that term has is about 20 to 50 in a given month. Now again, depending on the tool that you use, this will vary. The average search for Airbnb rental, right? Or like our last minute Airbnb versus last minute vacation rental, right? It's 4 to 5 to in some cases 10x depending on the variation of the keyword. Now, again, this isn't traffic that is starting on Airbnb. These are people starting on Google. And all that is to say is that like Airbnb has such a breadth and depth that people should not be so offended by the term because again, if you're trying to track travelers, which many of us are, right, it's whether you like it or not, it's how they're going to refer to you until they know a different way. So
Yeah.
I don't think from an entry standpoint it's worth getting so upset over. Once they're in your place, right, that's your
Exactly.
opportunity to like market to them and show them another way and teach them about your direct booking site and all that fun stuff. But at face value, when you're trying to attract a new guest, just go spend your time worrying about something else. Don't be hemming and hawing over the fact that people are calling your place an Airbnb. Anyway, so that's just a quick little hot take on that. But for some other learnings, one learning is I do feel like there's this moment happening where people we're seeing sort of things get smaller, right? Where I feel like for the last several decades, and this is true outside of hospitality, right? It's always been bigger. Like bigger is better, more, right? Like Amazon, right? The everything store. And now I think what's happening is there are all these like boutique operators that are popping up. And I actually think like boutique is cool again. This idea
Mhm.
of finding, especially as a millennial traveler, like the idea of finding like a gem that no one's heard of, right? Or that's different or special. Like that's what you want to show off on Instagram. You don't want to show
Mhm.
off like staying at the Hilton, right? That's great. But like what you really want is you want to show off that you found this really cool brand. It's this operator that's got 10 to 15 properties. It's super boutique and you found them on Instagram, right? And now you're
Mhm.
staying in their place and you want to show that off. So I think one of the things that I've learned is there's been this move, this shift to at least desiring these boutique memorable experiences that aren't just the big box names, if you will. And that's been a really interesting thing that I think I've learned from the host side of things and then also from the traveler side of things, like this stronger desire to move and shift and actually spend in a way that
Mhm.
prioritizes boutique.
It kind of goes into the side of from the operator side. This is something you have ownership on. This is special to you. It represents a part of you in some way or form, right? I think we all have that emotional piece of us that goes into our work when we create our own thing. And then
Yeah.
for the traveler, for them, it becomes their place, right? Like it's not
Mm.
just like the common hotel that's downtown Denver or downtown whatever city you're in, and everyone goes to because they're traveling for business and it's easy access to the train or whatever it might
Yeah.
be. It's like this becomes your special spot, just like how we all have like maybe our special coffee spot or our special cocktail hour or places we go with certain friend groups that are just very special, like
Yeah.
moment, not momentarily, but moment. I don't know if that makes
Yeah.
sense,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
like
No, no.
momentaries.
Yeah.
So I think that is super special in our industry because you're right. Boutique is now becoming a very popular word. And I think a lot of people are very excited for having ownership in something that used to be so far out of sight when it comes to owning a hotel or a restaurant. Now it's very easy, at least easier, lower barrier to entry. I would love to know your thoughts. And you mentioned going into this part of the conversation, but last minute deals and like all
Yeah.
this other stuff in the SEO piece. So for the listeners that don't know, because we did talk a little bit, you have a podcast behind the
Yeah.
stays. We also have a twice a week newsletter called Spontaneous, which is
Yeah.
such a clever name. I'm like, you are 100% a marketer. And I am just curious from your journey and travels of 15 months of living on the Airbnb platform and in the homes of many operators. I'm curious, how was this created, and what made you want to bring this to light rather than just keep doing what you were doing?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So one of the things, so my wife and I, we like nice things, which is unfortunate because we can't always afford nice things, right? But so one of the things, one of our big challenges was like, all right, like we want to try to find places that are beautiful, places that are inspirational, places that, again, we were working full time. Like this wasn't a
Mm,
vacation, right? So we knew we needed places where we could feel inspired to do our work. And I, in particular, do a lot of creative work. So I was like,
mm,
I need natural light. Like I need these places to be beautiful. I can't be in like an 11th floor like studio apartment, right? That's not my form of like travel, and that wasn't what we were looking for. That's what we were trying to escape from, right?
mhm.
So we intentionally were going after places that were beautiful, that were also like different and maybe a little bit unique. And so what we would try to do is we would, again, using the map view. This was really kind of like what we did. We pretty much exclusively used the map view because I felt like it, I don't know, at least at the time, there seemed to be like more inventory that would pop up than on the list view. And or because we were, I guess what it really was is we were super flexible. Like we could, this
Yeah.
was before, by the way, Airbnb had like that flexibility feature where now
Mhm.
you can be like, oh, like I want to stay for a week in this state, and then they show you like all your options. This was before
Yeah.
that. We could go anywhere, right? And we knew we never wanted to drive more than 5 or 6 hours in a day. So that was like the basic parameter that we were using. So, anyways, what we'd find that if we could be flexible with our dates, right? We could score these remarkable deals. This is before we even knew what like dynamic pricing was. And again, this was such a turbulent time too in the market where like travel was getting back, but like
Mhm.
also at the same time, all these new Airbnbs, all these new short-term rentals were coming onto the market as people were buying all these homes, right?
Yeah.
So supply was like crazy, which also and demand was still like taking a what it hadn't caught up yet. And so we were in this sweet spot where we could actually score these remarkable discounts, right, on these gorgeous places. So, anyways, we started sending these places that we were staying to family and friends and being like, dude, like this is normally $600 a night, but we got it for $300 a night for these 3 nights or whatever, Tuesday to a Thursday or whatever it was. And people would be like, how is that happening? Like, how are you finding these? And before we knew it, random people were asking to be added to like our list. And our list was really like a group chat. Like it wasn't a,
Yeah.
and so being the growth marketer I am, I was like, hey, maybe there's like an opportunity for a newsletter here. And this was also when like, everyone was starting a newsletter and everyone like newsletters were like super, super hot. I threw up a quick landing page on Webflow, threw up some copy saying like, hey, sign up to get the best last minute deals on Airbnb. And that was it. Like literally
Mhm.
that's all I did. And then Sam Parr, who's a popular kind of like podcaster, he started the company called The Hustle, which was acquired by HubSpot. And he's just like a media giant, a media guru. He saw it and ended up tweeting it out. And that was how we got like our first several hundred subscribers and stuff like that, which was super cool. So pretty much, and that was before we had ever launched the first edition. So the basic premise was like we were scraping Airbnb, we were scrolling through top rated listings and then selecting deals that we thought were both beautiful and also reasonable, like real discounts. And then we were sending
Mhm.
these out to folks in a very like simple newsletter. So that's how Spontaneous started, where it is today. We have 11 different newsletters broken up by different
Wow.
regions around the world. And we've got scrapes that happen actually daily now. And then we have all these systems set up in place to curate the best offerings from each week's scrape. So that's how that works.
That's yeah, I was just gonna ask, are you personally scrolling through Airbnb and finding all these? And I'm like, dude, how do you have even time to be on this podcast right now? I'd be stuck behind a computer.
That's how it started, man. That's how it started. But no, we've gotten a little bit more sophisticated since.
Yeah, okay. I was like, man, I'm glad that there's some scraping behind there. Yeah, I don't know if I'd be able to do that back in the day of scraping and going through it by myself. But I'm curious, one, awesome story. And I just love that how it naturally flowed together. Like just your travels and experience to then the group chat that became a newsletter, and now Sam Parr somehow discovers it. And like you said, a legend in the media space. I got to talk with HubSpot during podcast movement in August in Dallas last year, right when they I think acquired the hustle,
Oh,
or I
nice.
think or not the hustle. Yeah, was it the hustle?
Yeah, the
I think
hustle.
it
The
was,
hustle.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. That was
Yeah.
Sam's company.
Yeah, so it was a crazy time, but man, what did you do when you saw Sam Parr tweet it out? Were you just, and also, do you feel like it was, I always love asking this question of entrepreneurs in our industry and outside of our industry of, do you feel like your success, and obviously there's different definitions for success, so people can take that with a grain of salt. Do you feel like the timing of it was just very like well executed? Do you think if you started spontaneous at that phase a year later or a year
Mm.
before, Do you think something like that would have had happened and catapulted you to being able to now have scrapes and all these systems in place, or do you think it would have been very much like a still a bootstrap and scrappy startup?
That's a good question. First and foremost, what I will say is that while Sampar found it, tweeted it out, and whatnot, I like used Sampar's tactics on him for probably like the 6 months previous to that. I mean, like I think I might have. I was not an OG fan of My First Million or anything like that, which
Mhm.
is their popular podcast, but I definitely started listening pretty early. Like it must have been within the first like 15 or 20 episodes. So it was pretty early that I found their show and I started listening to it. And I was just inspired, man. Like these people were talking about how to build cool companies. They were talking a lot about, hey, growth tactics that they had used, sales tactics that they had used to grow their respective organizations. And one of the things, Sampar is a big copywriting nerd, and he's big on like the power of a cold email and all this stuff. So I had 6 months before Spontaneous came to be. I had a couple of other ideas, and I had pitched some small things to both Sam and Sean via email just to try to see if I could get them to like respond right to me. That was just my goal. I was like, just get a response. And actually, Sean Purry, who's the co-host of My First Million, he responded to two of my emails. Actually, Sam never responded to an email, but when I started this Airbnb adventure and I was going to start this podcast called Behind the Stays, I had sent him something else about travel or whatever. So I have this suspicion that like even if it was his subconscious, somehow like he like associated something with me, and
Mhm.
he had just been talking about the power of copywriting and why he really likes a good headline. And then I think he found our headline and just like really liked the headline and shared it as an example. So there was definitely some stuff behind the scenes that I had kind of seeds that I had planted. But to answer your question, I think a year later would have been too late, to be honest. And I
Mhm.
think to be 1,000% candid, right now, it's like there are some aspects of life that are returning to normal. Like people, it's definitely been harder. Like our growth rate has slowed in terms of just people that are signing up for these like last minute deals. Where a year ago, a lot of people were still able to work full time remotely, right? And so the
Yeah.
ability to go and very quickly book a last minute stay and travel somewhere else was just easier than it is now. There's still 30+% of the population that have the ability to work full time remotely. So I don't, last minute deals are going away anytime soon. But I do think if we had waited about a year,
Mhm.
it just wouldn't have taken off so quickly. It wouldn't have been such a, like a quick hit, if you will. So yeah, definitely lucky. Definitely lucky.
So, what is your roadmap kind of goal for spontaneous now? Knowing, yes, yeah, it can slow down, but just because it's slowing down a little doesn't mean it's like I'm sure you have plenty of ideas. So, I'm
Yeah.
curious, what's phase two, phase three, whatever the phase level you're going into or wanting to go into look like for because I'm also very curious, like monetization from it. You and I are
Yeah.
both in media. So, like, how does this all work and become the sphere of what you're building?
Yeah, yeah. I want to be super like transparent off the cuff here. And this is still a very humble business, like a humble enterprise. And I literally just left my day job at the end of
Mhm.
January and just starting to figure out like, okay, hey, this hasn't died. In fact, it's only grown.
Mhm.
I've met great people like Will Slickers and there's momentum, and I'm finally like meeting people in the hospitality space, of which again I know nothing, right? I really don't. I fell into this space very accidentally and have
We
grown.
all did.
Oh, good, good. That's good to know. And so, just quite frankly, like understanding, like I remember I had to just Google a bunch of terms. Like I hear people on podcasts like you will and drop an acronym and I'd be like, what the hell is that? And I'd
Yeah.
have to Google like RevPan, right? What is that? Like, and just all this stuff that I just didn't know, right? And so I feel like a sponge. I'm just trying to like absorb as much as I can right now. But that said, what I'm trying to do, and this might not be possible, Will, and there's like a super strong possibility that this just goes like nowhere. But really, what I'm wrestling with is I have to believe, based off of the people in my networks and the followings that some of these short term rentals have on Instagram, like that there's a way to connect these luxury, like unique, unexpected escapes with travelers who want to go and experience something different and can do so somewhat flexibly. So what I'm trying to do is there's the following really that Behind the Stays has is Behind the Stays has cultivated this audience of people that have unique stays, right? So A-frames, tree houses, like these really cool domes, the homes. They have Instagram accounts for their homes, and these Instagram accounts have hundreds of thousands of followers, right?
Yeah.
That's Behind the Stays audience. We don't have a ton of operators that are listening to our podcast per se, or even folks that have been in the industry for a long time. These are newer folks, most of whom came from outside the industry, They got interested in creating these beautiful, unique experiences and decided to just launch an Instagram page for their home, and it's taken off. So that's the audience that we have. What these hosts, they typically don't struggle with like huge gaps of availability. Gosh, that was a hard
Yeah.
word to say. Um,
You're good.
and, but right, more and more they'll have a few nights in the middle of the week that like pop open, or like last minute cancellations have been like on the rise, and so they need some tooling to help meet this sort of demand that exists when a cancellation does come through. And so what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to figure out like, is there an opportunity for folks that have unique stays? And by the way, unique stays can be defined in a lot of different ways. It's not just a treehouse, right? You might have
Yeah.
a run of the mill single family home, but you've cultivated a truly unique experience inside that home, and that would meet my criteria here. But is
Mhm.
there a way to marry these mostly booked, like rarely free, but when they do become free, there's a lot of people that want to go stay at that place. So is there a social network you could create, for example, where you're following, right? People wish list Airbnbs all the time. That's great. What if there was a way to understand beyond just the number of people that had wish listed your stay? What if you could have a little bit more data around who those folks are, right? What if
Yeah.
you could have access to their email address? Like they're a prospect, they're not a guest, but what if hosts could get access to some of that information? Is there a world in which travelers like me who like to stay in nice places, who do have flexibility because they can go anywhere with work, is there a way they follow some of the most incredible homes around the country, around the world, and then get notified when they become available? And is there a way where you could create a system where those emails that get sent offer some sort of meaningful discount? Where if we're 2 weeks out, place is available, and I book today, I could score up to 30% off of that stay or whatever it might be, right? Is there a system where that works?
All right, Slick Talkers, now for another dynamic sponsored duo of the podcast. I would love to introduce you to Vintori and Safely. About Vintori, we've had Brooke Flotz on the podcast, who is a founder, multiple times, and him and his team know numbers. They know data and they know marketing. They know how to help property managers just like you scale and grow their business by adding more inventory, aka more homes, into your rental program that drive the bottom line. For all of you listeners that want to learn how to scale and grow your inventory, you can get a free digital copy of Brooke's book called From Zero to 500 Properties in 5 Years. And for an added bonus, if you would do a demo of the Vintori platform, you'll get a $50 gift card to Amazon. Now that's a sick deal. And now to touch on our friends at safely.com. Safely.com helps property managers just like you and I protecting the homes that they manage from structural damage to content damage and, of course, bodily injury. This means plates, linens, cups, couches, tables, curtains, walls, and, of course, your guests themselves are protected. And this helps you by scaling your company in order to ensure that you are retaining owners and inventory in your program. If anything is broken or if anyone is hurt, you are able to make a claim through Safely, and within 3 business days, you can get instantly paid out to replace any items and settle any claims that happen on site without having to deduct from your owner's payouts. That's why I call these guys the dynamic sponsor duo. And thank you so much for tuning into the podcast. Check out their offers in the show notes, and back to the episode.
You've got folks like Wimstay, great
Yeah.
example of an OTA that's doing this. Wimstay, though, is not really focusing on like that unique category or even like that luxe category. They're a great tool for people that want just a basic kind of last minute stay. What I'm
Mhm.
trying to do is say, is there an opportunity to focus on the higher end, truly unique stays, the Instagram stays, and marry that with the demographic of traveler that wants to stay in a nice place and can go somewhere last minute? I don't know if I don't know if this is true. I don't know if this will work, but I think that there's enough momentum in what I've seen so far with our newsletters that there's definitely a hunger there. I think the question is, what's the right meal to serve these people?
Mhm.
And I don't know that I figured that out yet.
The right meal, but also how do you serve that meal when everyone is so diversified on tech, right? So
Mm,
if a unique stay treehouse and a unique stay dome have a last minute cancellation, but you have this curated list of hungry, want to have these unique opportunities to stay at a property like that, but one's on guesty for host and one's
yeah,
on host away, or
yeah,
one's not on any property management software and they're just on Airbnb, or maybe a mix of like a iCal link up between Verbo and Airbnb itself. How do you serve? That's the question. I think that's super hard because we're so fragmented, not just in property style, but in operations and tech. So
Yeah.
that's the hard part. And I'm curious to like, cause what you're talking about. Now, this has got me all fired up because I'm a big fan of book direct and building a brand rather than just being a Airbnb host or even like a brand company, but that doesn't have their own infrastructure on the back end.
Yeah.
Is how do you serve that? And I'm curious from your perspective, you've had over 100 interviews, you've got to chat with amazing companies. Wanderer was one of them that you've had on the show, and you've
Yeah.
had a lot of these cool cabin and treehouse and dome people that I've seen on your Instagram, which are beautiful. And I'm just curious, what's your learnings and takeaway from like how do you serve that to them if there is that
Yeah.
hunger and that meal that you're trying to create? Which I love that analogy, by the way. So I love that you said
It's
that. It's like really good.
making stuff up as we go, Will. But no, I think what you just said is spot on. There is no system. Honestly, half the people that I've had on my show who again have collectively close to 1 million followers across platforms, like many people that have close to that for again their cabin or the treehouse or whatever it is, like they don't have a PMS, right? Or they have a PMS, but they only have four properties that are a part of their collection. And so it's just they treat it differently. They really are using it for email automation and maybe some calendar syncing, and that's it. Like they're barely scratching the surface of what like their PMS can do. And so what I do think is hard is like a lot of folks, and it's been such a privilege because again, I know nothing about this space. I'm just like making stuff. I just like connecting with people. And then people reach out, right? And like I've had lots of people who I've hopped on the phone with and they've got this idea. They want to invest or they want to do something. And the problem is I don't want to build another OTA. And I feel like that's everyone's
Yeah.
trying to push us in this direction of build like an OTA. And I'm like,
Yeah.
I'm bootstrapping this thing. Like, I can't like compete against Airbnb. And there are lots of other like niche OTAs like Wimsay, who I've already mentioned, who are doing like really great stuff. They also have 150 plus people on their team. They just raised another round. They just closed like a $10 million round. That's amazing. And I'm so happy for that. And I think, by the way, they're onto something.
Yeah.
But like work it takes to do that until I have a super clear like path of like the market really is hungry for these super unique last minute stays, which again, I think I have some data that says that they are, but enough to inject that amount of capital in it right now. No, like I don't feel comfortable with that. I'm still learning exactly what the product market fit looks like. And I have, I would say, the silhouette of that, but I'm still learning very much. So, anyways, if you don't want to be an OTA, right, then the question becomes, okay, what value are you bringing to hosts? Like Zach, how do you make money? So, what
Mhm.
we do partner with hosts, and what we do is you pay an annual subscription, and anytime your property is free during our curation window, we include it in our newsletter, we include it in our website during that window, right? So, I've been leveraging ourselves as, hey, we're a marketing channel for you, right? We're not an OTA. We don't, no one can book through Spontaneous, right? We're
Mhm.
not a booking engine. Like we are sending traffic to your website. But what's crazy is like most of the time, most of our host partners, we're sending them right back to their Airbnb listing. Like they don't even
Yeah.
have their direct booking or their direct booking site. Many of them actually have direct booking sites, but they're so bad
Yeah.
and or their direct booking engine is so bad that they don't even want to send guests to that. So
Mhm.
they're paying me to literally like take the traffic that is coming to Spontaneous and send that traffic back to Airbnb. It is just wild, but that is like God's honest truth of kind of like where we're at
Yeah.
right now. What I'd really love to be able to do is so right now I've done a bunch of work to we rank number one for last minute Airbnb deals. So if you Google last minute Airbnb deals, Spontaneous ranks number one organically, which is super cool, right? And
Yeah.
awesome. And there are thousands of people that every month are searching for that term, right? And we rank number one. So we have this traffic that we're generating. And we have people that are then subscribing, right? And signing up for, hey, I want to get last minute weekend long deals in the Midwest or whatever it is.
Mhm.
What I'd love to be able to do is I'd love to marry all those people with host direct booking sites, right, from all these places. So what I'd love to be able to do is streamline this. So I'm introducing folks to the ability that like, hey, you can book direct because you didn't like
Mhm.
Will, unless you were in this industry, you have no idea. I'm telling my friends all the time about, hey, before you book on Airbnb, try to Google that place and try to see if you can figure out what the name of it is. And it's always
Mhm.
hard, right? Sometimes like the Airbnb like title is so different than the name of the actual cabin or whatever it is. But I'm like, look, spend 15 minutes, try to Google, try to find their direct booking site, and I guarantee you'll save at least 10-15%, if not even more, just booking
Mhm.
direct. And I've had friends who are now like, oh my gosh, dude, thank you so much. Like I did it and like it worked and I saved so much money. So if there
Yeah.
was a way to marry these direct booking sites for these really unique stays with these hungry travelers who are looking for last minute deals, but also want elevated experiences, I think that there's a lot of magic there. And I think that there's a lot of opportunity there. And I want to figure out how to do that.
And I love the whole conversation around this too. I love your perspective on, because I gave up basically trying to tell people, yeah, short-term rentals, it's not Airbnb, it's vacation rental. And yeah, like I'll say it to industry friends who I know that like the differentiator, right? But
Yeah.
what you're doing is you're meeting the audience where they're at rather than trying to make them meet you at your place of no, we're not ranking number one for short-term rentals or last minute short-term rentals. We're ranking number one for last minute Airbnbs because
Yeah.
that's where they're at. And at the end of the day, love it or hate it, it is what it is. That's
It is
how
what it is.
I tell any of my friends, "Oh, I have a short-term rental company." They're like, "What's that?" I'm like, "We put homes on Airbnb." I just gotta you gotta break it down so simple, and that's where they're at. So the fact that you're meeting the audience where they're at, you're trying to pull them over and get them into a curated list. It is a form of direct booking in the shape that you're doing. Because yes, even though you are sending them mostly back to the Airbnb profile or the account or the listing,
Yeah.
you're still you still have ownership of that data of the guest
Yeah.
outside of the platform, which is super important for any of these property owners or brands or even yourself as a marketer. That's I think where people get hung up on is they don't understand that yes, it's Airbnbs and it's the platform itself that you're pushing them to, but you still own the data. And that's huge
Exactly.
in our
Yeah. Yeah.
huge.
Exactly. And I'm glad actually you brought that up because so one of the features that we've got this product that's it's been going through a revamp for 4 months, way too long. It's just it needs to be done, but we're not done with it yet. But anyways, it's called the showroom. And basically, anytime people can go and they can like wish list, they can heart like their favorite stays and they can create accounts. And what's cool is if you're a host partner and somebody like likes or wish lists your stay, you get access to their email address. And if you have a MailChimp or whatever email tool you might use for your own kind of communications for your own list, that'll automatically integrate with that list. So what we're trying again, what I really want to do is I want to help people who are hungry for these unique stays to be able to meet the hosts of these places and be able to book direct with them.
Yeah.
That's ultimately what I want to do so that you can cultivate a better, more personalized experience and everyone wins at the end of the day. But the road to get there is just quite frankly, it's hard because not everyone cares about direct bookings. A lot of the people that have invested in these, take Wander, for example, right? Although there may be a bad example because they're doing something a little bit different here, but what they're owning the entire audience, even though they're still listed on Airbnb, which is funny. I don't know if you've seen this. Their whole like model is like to verticalize like the whole short-term rental industry, which is really it's a very ambitious goal. And like I'm a huge fan of what they're doing, but they're still like listing a lot of the time on Airbnb, which is funny. But again, what they're trying to do, right, is they're trying to get people used to booking direct and falling in love, starting their search with a Wander, right? I want
Mhm.
to help other people do that with these other unique stays. But the problem is the people, behind a lot of these projects are oftentimes playing with institutional capital. These people don't really care about the 7 to 10 to 15%, whatever it is that Airbnb ends up taking.
Mhm.
It's really about the quantity and growth more than it is about anything else. And I do think that's actually a bigger friction point than some people might realize when it comes to trying to get more people to book direct is the fact that people are unfortunately like we're lazy. And unless it's like super meaningful, unless we've just been like totally kicked in the nuts by Airbnb or something like that, the likelihood of us just deciding to 10%, 12%, it doesn't mean as much to people, especially if you have a smaller portfolio. If you have a larger
Mhm.
portfolio, then that starts adding up a little bit. But like the headache, right, is let's be real. Everyone talks about like why you should just book direct. And I'm 100% behind that movement. It's a frick ton of work though. Like
Yeah.
you don't have a website and then you need a direct booking site and then you need a PMS and like these things don't really integrate that well with each other. Like it's just a lot of work. Maybe at the end of the day, it's worth giving Airbnb their 7% so that you don't have to deal with that headache. Anyways, that was a lot. And but yeah.
No, I love it because, like, even from like the guest perspective, why would I go through the amount of boxes I have to go through in order to book direct when I can just go on Airbnb? If I find the property, I literally hit book now for my dates. I swipe, and all of a sudden it books. It uses my card. It does all the things. I don't need to add 10,000 box of information. Plus, this is the thing that you're probably seeing too. You just made a point. I have to get a PMS and I have to have a website and then the booking engine's not great. And then I have to learn about like SEO and marketing and how
Yeah.
to capture emails. And basically you're not a property manager anymore. You're a tech and marketing operator, which
Exactly.
like defeats the whole purpose of why you probably get into the industry anyways. It's a very hard mission, but at the end of the day, somebody has to do it. And I think there's a comment or whatever the phrase is called about there's a lot of different roads to the same destination. And I think
Yeah.
the spontaneous road is a road to the same destination or outcome of book direct, owning control, being like creating a brand and having that piece of understanding that you're building a brand. And yes, it's hard to compete against Airbnb, but there are ways to slowly but surely, it's not an overnight battle or not an overnight success. So that's where I think if everyone just goes in with that mindset of, okay, it's not gonna be tomorrow, it's not gonna be next week, it's not gonna be a year from now. But if I just
Yeah.
keep going and just keep doing little things like adding a spontaneous, adding, my own property management software, maybe adding a stay-fi or this and that, and
Yep.
just getting creative, it does compound over time. So
Yeah.
that's I think the compound is more important than the we need to be 100% book direct.
Yeah.
It's almost impossible to go. So, 'cause at the end of the day, we are hospitality operators. We're not marketing experts and
Yeah.
technology experts.
Yeah, no, it's a lot, and I'm really glad that you brought that up because I think that's just a super valid point. What I'd also just say too is the friction that you do have to jump through when you are booking direct. You've touched on this a little bit. Again, I won't name names, but like the number
Mhm.
of times where I have found right since understanding that you can book direct, which again I didn't
Yeah.
even know before a year ago. The number of times you go, you click book, right? I get like pop-ups from Google saying this site is not secure or like this, are you sure you want to continue? It is sketchy. Like
Yeah.
unfortunately, booking direct, depending on the platform that you're using, like it still looks sketchy. And the worst is like when you're taken to a page that's clearly like a page that's managed by your PMS, right? And the
Mhm.
branding kind of looks similar, but it's also whoa, it's really not. And then you're like, is this the same site? And now you're asking me for these 27 fields, my credit card. And again, like to your point, Will, which is super valid, until somebody can create that experience like Airbnb via a direct booking site, and it's truly as simple as, hey, the UX and UI is so easy to use. The trust is so high until that can be replicated. And I have not seen that replicated. Like, again, I'm a huge fan of the PMSs in the space. I'm a huge fan of people like Mark, who's doing these great things with Boostly. But at the same
Yeah.
time, like, all the designs look the same and the PMSs like are full of friction. They're not friction free. And
Yeah.
so until we can solve for those two things, which I have to believe is solvable, like
Mhm.
it is solvable, right? And I think that there's a lot of hope, right? But until those
Yeah.
things are solved, don't be upset that you have 10% of your bookings are direct. That's
Yeah.
great, right? 90% of people aren't going to trust something that looks like that. And
Yeah.
unfortunately, in the context of this, when people are dealing with money and they're dealing with their travel, they're dealing with their vacation, looks do really matter, right?
Yeah.
Trust really does matter. And if it doesn't look as trustworthy as Airbnb does, I know at least if I book with Airbnb and I have an issue, I can take it up with Airbnb, right? I don't have the same trust in you, right?
Yeah.
And so until we look the part, stop acting like it's a sin to be on the OTAs, right? Like
Mhm.
until you figure out how to create a frictionless experience that is like Airbnb and is just as easy and is just as simple and is just as beautiful, right? Once you do that, then complain all you want. But until we get there as an industry and whatnot, we should just be a little bit more respectful when we have these conversations.
Agreed. And at the end of the day, this is I might get canceled for saying this, but this is the one time I'll say we should bring bullying back, and that is bullying the tech companies to push this forward. Like at the end of the day,
Yeah.
why is Airbnb the only platform that has this good UX and user like everything? Like, why are they the only ones when all these other companies have raised millions of dollars and
Millions of
yeah,
dollars.
yeah,
And they have hundreds of engineers on their team. This is
100
not this is it's shocking to me. It's shocking
yeah.
to me. Like I again, there's an OTA that I've mentioned before that I'm on their website and I'm like just like, why does the branding suck? Like why is the
Yeah,
design horrible? Come on.
yeah,
These are not hard problems like to solve. They're really not. So again, I don't know and I've wondered Will if maybe this is just like maybe there's something I'm missing. There probably is something that I'm missing. And I want these are great people and I want to respect everybody, but I'm like where are priorities? Because if you
yeah.
want to truly be a competitor, compete on design and compete on UX,
Yeah.
that's pretty much all you need, quite frankly.
100%. And at the end of the day, I think we should stop as an industry. And I'm so glad you brought this up. I think we need to stop talking about all these other things until we can actually nail down the simple, like, there is something that we are probably missing. But at the end of the day, I know for a fact it can happen. So
Yeah.
that's where I'm like, why is nobody putting this up further on the list of priority? So I totally agree with you. I totally agree.
Yeah.
Zach, we are getting on time and I want to bring something back for the show. And one, thank you again just for bringing all your insight and this is such a fun conversation. So thank you for being a guest on the show.
I don't get canceled after this, man. Like I'm just a nobody, and people are gonna start like blowing up my
Not at all.
dreams. hating me for all these hot takes. But yeah, no, I appreciate it, man. It's been fun.
No, I just said we need to bully people, so I'm probably gonna get canceled. So this is the last episode of Slick Talk. I'm just kidding. But in all reality, we've been doing this thing. We haven't done the last few episodes just before yours because they're a little bit different and unique. But doing this thing where we ask our current guest to ask a question for our next guest, and it can be
Mm.
about anything. It doesn't have to be business related or personal. It can be anything under the sun. I would love to know for you, based off of your expertise in interviewing and asking questions, what would be a really good question for the next person?
Yeah, yeah. Oh gosh, that's really good. So one of the things that just came to mind is we talk about our stories a lot.
Mhm.
It's one of the things I like to do on my podcast is say, hey, Will, like where does the story of Hospitality FM begin? And it's just a fun way to give people the opportunity to take that in whatever direction that they want, to share a
Mhm.
lot or share a little. But maybe a fun question would be like, what are one or two really crucial pivots, right, that
Mm.
happened in your story that without those pivots, right, your story would be completely written in a different context or a different light, right? So what are one or two pivots that had those things not happened, where you are today would not have been possible, whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, right? Like what are those like one or two super meaningful pivots that have defined where you've gotten today, and what are some lessons you might have learned from those pivots? I don't know if
I
that
love
one was good or
no,
really crappy, but that was just the first thing that popped into my mind.
that's great. And since I don't have a question from the previous guest before you for you, I actually want to ask you that question. What are the 1 to 2
Mm.
pivots for Zach Cruz that would have rewritten your story if you didn't make?
Oh gosh. I This is a long story for another time, Will, but I left home at 16. I was born and raised in Hawaii. I ended
Wow.
up leaving halfway through high school and moved across the country to the East Coast and ended up living with a friend and their family and finishing off high school right outside of the DC area, in the DC
Mm.
suburbs, actually. And that move totally changed my entire life and my entire trajectory. So I'm very thankful for my parents for letting me move and amicably and in a very supportive way,
Yeah.
encouraging me to take this leap and do something wildly different. Because if I hadn't done that, I don't even know. Yeah, I was in a really it was a dark place. It was a tough time in my life, and that move changed everything. So
Mm.
I'm very thankful for leaving Hawaii, which is crazy to say, right? Because everyone's you left Hawaii, like what?
Yeah.
Like you grew up there and you moved to freaking Northern Virginia? But I did, and it was the best decision I ever made.
Wow. I wish we hit on this before everything else. I wish we had time for the whole story, but man, it gave me chills. That's good. Dang, I think we need to do a part 2 of this
Yeah, we'll do
episode.
a part two over the happy hour. Like we should find time, find an excuse to do it in person so it's even like more fun.
Yes.
I'm down, man.
All right, cool. We'll have a wine podcast night or something like that. We could do
Let's do it.
wine, cocktails, beers, whatever. Go all the above. I love it. Zach, I always like to ask the final question for our guests to leave. If you had any spot for the listener that wants to discover you more, reach out, connect, do whatever, what would the destination or the link be that you'd want them to go to directly?
I'm pretty active on social media, so if you like Twitter, I feel like that there's like a kind of a split audience. There's like the people that love LinkedIn in the hospitality world, and there's the people that like love Twitter, and they're very different groups of people. I've come to realize, which is fun. But I love everybody, so I love hanging out with both of these fun crowds. So on Twitter, it's my handle is at zboozy. That's Z and then BOZEE. And then on LinkedIn, my name's hard to spell, but it's Zachary, Zachary. And then my last name is Boozy Cruz, Busekrus. If you just type that into LinkedIn search, I'm pretty sure I'm the only Zachary Boozy Cruz. So you won't be able to miss me on that one. But yeah, honestly, dude, this has been a pleasure. I'm a huge fan of everything that you're doing. I think you're carving out just such a fun, it's just so cool to see what you're doing. And I'm very honored to get to be a part of it in a small way. So thanks for the opportunity, man.
No, man, we love working with you, and it's only the beginning. We have much more to do together, so I'm excited. And yeah, just thank you for the opportunity and the time. For all of you listeners and potentially live viewers that have watched this episode, we would love for you to reach out to Zach, connect. I will make sure everything's linked in the show notes for this episode for you to connect one-on-one. And of course, like always, please and subscribe to everything spontaneous, behind the stays, and of course, Slick Talk. So we'll see you all again next week. And Zach, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thanks, man.
Thank you so much for listening, and thank you to our show partners for making Slick Talk, the hospitality podcast, possible. We hope you enjoyed the show, and we would love to connect with you outside of the podcast. So you can follow us on all of our social media channels for daily hospitality content, or find us on slicktalkthepodcast.com. And don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe so you never miss an episode. I'm your host, Will Slickers, and we will see you guys all again next week.